In 1982, TSR published The Tomb of the Lizard King, which was their first adventure module that got a boost to the artwork on the cover. But we all know that you never judge a book by its cover. So in this video, we are going to review I2 Tomb of the Lizard King. So let's get rolling. Hey everybody, what's up? My name is Mike from D4 Dungeon, helping you get the most out of your gaming time and your gaming dollars by providing you with tips, tools, and product reviews, just like this video right here, the review of Tomb of the Lizard King. So if you're into Dungeons & Dragons and this is your first time here, then consider subscribing. Tomb of the Lizard King is the second adventure in the I series, or the Intermediate series, and was written by Mark Akers in 1982. Now, it was designed for player group sizes of about 7 to 9, so a larger group, and character levels of 5 to 7. And it was set in the county of Eeyore, which, oddly enough, was not in the world of Greyhawk. Yet later on down the road, TSR decided to put the county of Eeyore into the world of Greyhawk. But at the end of the day, really, you could take this adventure and put it into any campaign setting that you want to, as long as that there's a swamp nearby, for reasons that we'll discuss later. Tomb of the Lizard King starts with your characters in the palace of the 5th Count of Eeyore, and he's looking for brave adventurers to help him solve a troubling problem. And that problem is that there are brigands to the south that are raiding caravans and stealing and looting everything. Now, he's tried to solve this problem on his own by sending troops down there to put an end to it, but those troops never returned, and no one's heard of them since. So now he's turning to your brave companions and a number of other adventurers potentially to kind of interview them to see if they are worthy to go. So what the Count doesn't know at this point is that the rumors about this evil reforming or resurging in the south is actually true. And what is going on is this lizard man, who used to plague the area hundreds of years ago, and in fact was defeated by the first Count of Eeyore, has returned to life, unbeknownst to the Count, as a vampire. And this all kind of came about when the lizard man, Sakatha, made an unfortunate wish that went slightly wrong and has now turned him into a vampire. But long story short, he is now in the south, in the undead flesh, plaguing the area and trying to return himself to his former glory. And he wastes no time in his attack on the Count and your PCs, because as your player characters are being deputized by the Count to go and solve the problem in the south, his minion is hidden inside that audience chamber and drops a huge boom fireball on the room and throws the whole place into chaos. And with that, your player characters are thrust into the adventure and they must find Sakatha and defeat him. But they don't know where it is or where his temple is. And so the middle section of the adventure is a bit of sleuthing through the county itself, looking for where it is. Then the next section is going into the swamp, because that's where lizard men live, and then finding the temple. And then the last section of the adventure is a good old-fashioned dungeon crawl where you move through the tunnel or through the temple and make your way into some dungeons and find Sakatha, hopefully defeating him. And getting to Sakatha and defeating him will be no easy task, and the adventure even outlines this right off the hop, letting you know that this adventure was designed to be deadly. And believe me, it is. It is not one of those adventures where your player characters can kind of whimsically move their way through. This could easily end up being a total party kill if your player characters are not on their game. With the overview out of the way, it is time to move on to the specifics, where we go through 5 categories and give each of them a rating out of 4. When it comes to encounter settings, there are a fair number of different locales or locations that your player characters are going to move through. The initial one is inside the palace itself of the Count of Eeyore, and after that, the player's characters move their way through a farming county or area where they go into little villages and also have random encounters on the road. Then they move themselves into a swamp, and then later into a more abandoned temple, and later again into a dungeon. So it's not all one type of setting, which is really nice and refreshing. There are a ton of combat encounters in this adventure, and one of them is a black dragon, a 400-year-old black dragon that used to hang out with Sakatha when he was a little baby dragon. And there's also Sakatha himself, the big bad, who is a 9th level spellcaster and a lizardman vampire. So if those two alone weren't tough enough, there are a ton of wandering encounters as well that are also difficult. So this is one of those areas where there is no shortage of combat encounters. Your player characters are going to have a lot of role-playing opportunities as well. First and foremost, off with the count. When we start the adventure, they will be dialoguing and role-playing with this count. And later on, once they get the job to solve the problem of Sakatha, there's going to be a sleuthing bit where they have to find out where Sakatha's temple is. And that'll involve working through the villages in the countryside, talking to the people to find out where it is. And what makes the role-playing even more difficult and sometimes crucial is that Sakatha has been charming a number of people, not only in the Count's employ, but also throughout the county. And so the player characters might never really know or realize that some of them are feeding them completely wrong information. So the way that they roleplay will be really critical into the success of this adventure. As far as problem-solving encounters, there's not a ton of them in this adventure, but there are a lot of encounters that don't involve monsters, but if you aren't on your game, could be very deadly. And an example of this would be the River of Nothingness as they get into the final dungeon leading into Sakatha's area. And this is a river that is not a river at all. It is an illusion of a river and an illusion of a boat. And the player characters, if they don't really think their way through it, will hop right onto the boat and instead fall straight through into vats of acid, which could almost lead to an instant death. So there's a number of these kind of situations where if your characters aren't using their wits, they're probably not going to make it through. So not quite problem solving, but still a different type of encounter that makes for a fresh experience. All said and done, in this category, I gave it 3 out of 4 stars just because there was a little bit of a lack of the problem solving. However, the wittiness part kind of makes up for it, but 3 out of 4 stars. When we look at the motivations of our monsters and NPCs in this adventure, Mark Akers does a really good job of giving the backstory and motivation for Sakatha himself, the lizard man, the big bad. We understand that he is ancient. He was defeated by the first Count of Eeyore, and in that moment of his death, he cursed or uttered a curse and a last wish that he would be able to come back and drink the blood of all of the Count's offspring for generations to come. And so you really get a sense of how angry this person is and what's gone on in the background. And to a little bit as well, the 5th Count of Eeyore, we get a bit of a backstory as well. So those two are our main characters that we feel like we got some motivations for. But what really makes this adventure awesome in this category are the random encounters. Now, the random encounters normally in an adventure are you roll to see if there is one, and then you roll on a table to see what monster shows up, and then you as the DM just kind of runs that encounter. But in this adventure, each random encounter itself has its own kind of like mini backstory or motivation. So, there might be ogres that are wandering through, but you'll get what these ogres are doing there and what they're looking for and when they'll attack, and maybe they won't attack. So it is really cool to see random encounters that themselves have motivations and backstories. So for all of those things, really even the random encounters themselves deserve a 4 out of 4 for this category. When we take a look at the logical layout of Tomb of the Lizard King, we find that this adventure isn't quite sandboxy. I mean, it's definitely on a path, right? You need to find where the Lizard King is hiding out. You need to find out how to get there and sleuth your way through. So there is definitely a linear progression of what you need to do. There's not a lot of, I'm going to go do this first and then I'm going to tackle that. So it is not a sandbox. However, it does provide you some leverage as to which way you're going to go. So when you're sleuthing, you might pick some different areas that you go to first and then next. So it does give you a little bit of choice. So I kind of think of this as the Goldilocks of logical layout. It is not too sandboxy that your characters are just all over the place, yet it's not so railroady that your player characters don't feel like they have any choices. It is just right. And so for this, I also gave it 4 out of 4 stars. Mark Akers did a really good job when it comes to providing descriptions for all of his locations inside this adventure. He uses language that really does kind of hit all of the senses for the sight, the sound, the smell, and what it feels like. And he's put them all inside nice little, description boxes, which is also really awesome. But what makes it also a great adventure for the writing quality is that he's built in a sense of mystery and foreshadowing. And an astute player at the beginning of the adventure, when they're talking to the Count and he's trying to decide whether or not to hire these player characters to go and solve the problem, you can kind of tell, if you're astute, that maybe the Count isn't telling everything. So there's a bit of mystery that's coming here. What's the Count not telling me? What is it that's going on that I don't know? And then there's also the charmed NPCs throughout the entire adventure that are also awfully convincing in a lot of times, and telling half-truths and sometimes outright lies that the player characters are, getting this kind of sense of mystery. But at the same time, some of the charmed people are actually telling truths that are going to foreshadow what's going to happen in the future. It's really well done and kind of comes together in a nice bundle. So no surprise here, I gave it another 4 out of 4 stars for writing quality. As we take a look at how easy this is to run as a dungeon master, Mark Akers provides us with a number of tips and tools throughout this adventure in order to help make us successful. And even just at the beginning of the adventure, you can already see that he's giving us tips and tools when it comes to timekeeping, travel, shelter, food, and all those types of things are all really thoughtfully included at the beginning of the adventure. And I've already mentioned that there were description boxes, so the boxes for that you need to say as a description are clearly laid out. But what's even cooler is after that, all the material that's laid out for the Dungeon Master is done so in a very clear and easy way, which was actually as simple as sometimes just putting spaces in between the different thoughts or things that you need to consider. And yes, it does mean that it takes up more room, but it's so much easier for your eyes to scan through and easy to read and pick out the parts and the stat blocks for all the various monsters. Really clear and easy to read. And one last point about details, because there is no lack of details in this whole adventure all the way through, but there's one in particular that I want to make note of, and it's in the very beginning when your player characters are in that audience chamber with the Count of Eeyore and the kind of sidekick or minion of Sakatha, the big bad, is in that room, and he's about to drop a fireball or fire column. And before he does so, in the description or the tips for the DM, it says, and it gives a script, right? And, oh, great evil power, help me strike my enemies, or something like that. And then it says the DM should count to 5 out loud. And that is just a really cool tip, even to carry into other adventures, because then it says after the 5 seconds, this is what's going to happen. And it helps convey that urgency to your player characters. Like, look, you have 5 seconds to make a decision right now because something's about to happen. And that was so cool to read. And it's something that I've used in other adventures as well. And so for the section Ease to Run as a Dungeon Master, I gave it another 4 out of 4 stars. So I think by now you probably have already figured out what I think about this adventure. It is a really great adventure for a number of reasons, and one of them is the descriptions that are put in there. The motivations and the wandering or random encounters are absolutely stellar. It has an epic feeling, this whole adventure, with the story, and I think some of that has to do with the fact that your player characters are plunged right into it right off the hop, with that big bad sidekick dropping the fireball in the audience chamber. They are really just thrown into this epic adventure that has a good mix of combat and role playing and opportunities for your player characters to use their wits. Tomb of the Lizard King really does just knock it out of the park by killing it in almost every category. I truly believe that this is a great adventure to run, and it would be a great adventure to be a player character in. And so as a full overall conclusion, I gave it 4 out of 4 stars. I hope you found this review of I2, Tomb of the Lizard King helpful, and if you did, do us a favor and hit that like button down below. And if you want to know more about this adventure and go a little bit deeper into the review, you can head on over to d4dungeon.com. That's our website, where we have a whole article written up about this adventure, where to buy it, and all those types of things. And if you want to learn more about playing or DMing Dungeons and Dragons or really anything else Dungeons and Dragons related, then start right now by clicking that subscribe button right over there and hit the bell so that you don't miss any future videos. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.